at Driven by Dreams, we're thrilled to welcome Chuck Witham, an accomplished attorney at Witham, Mahoney and Abbott LLP. With a JD, MBA, real estate broker's license, and extensive law firm management experience, Chuck brings a unique multidisciplinary perspective on tackling business challenges. His expertise and insights are invaluable for entrepreneurs navigating the complexities of business and legal strategy. Let's dive in. Hi, Chuck. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'd love to hear more about you and your story.
Sure. Nice to see you, Anishka. Happy to do it. So I'm an attorney. I practice in corporate and mergers and acquisitions in San Diego, California. I actually started at a relatively large law firm where I was an associate and a partner, and again practiced in mergers and acquisitions and corporate and securities type work. Eventually, after about 15 years, I decided to branch off and start my own firm, and started my law practice about 10, almost 11 years ago now, and have continued to practice in the same areas. It's a completely different journey than working at a larger firm, because now I am an entrepreneur and we do deal with all the things that business owners deal with from day to day, which could be anything from human resources issues to scaling to client development, client retention, bandwidth and capacity issues, all of the things that we didn't really have to worry about too much when I was at a larger practice at a firm.
So, what motivated you to become an entrepreneur?
That's a great question. I guess I've always sort of been interested in being an entrepreneur and being my own boss, but I wasn't in a profession that really lended itself to, striking out and having a practice as an entrepreneur. And it really took quite a while until I felt like I had enough clients and enough support and the right skill set to really go ahead and pull the trigger and try to, do it myself and not be reliant on an existing framework or law firm.
So, I understand that your interest in the legal profession started when you were in elementary school, right? So, what sparked your interest?
Oh, for me, it was really a family thing, because my father had been an attorney, and I get to watch him in the things he did, and in a very different practice area. He was going to court and making arguments and uh, practicing in that nature. But I remember having opportunities to do reports on things, and I'd be like, "Hey, Dad, what kind of materials can you grab me from the office that I can attach as exhibits to my report?" And he was glad to comply, and shared with me a lot of things that were very helpful. But um, while my friends were, writing reports about, owning a pizza restaurant, right, or becoming an astronaut, I was writing about things that my father was doing for the most part, which was um, a bit more educational than I probably appreciated at the time.
So, you mentioned some of the challenges that come with being an entrepreneur. So, what were some of the key challenges you faced while growing your firm and how did you overcome them?
Well, there's a lot of challenges with being an entrepreneur. I mean, you need to have, of course, a business model that is sustainable, meaning you've got to have the revenues in order to keep going, and you've got to have your expenses and overhead under control. Otherwise, you could make, all the revenues in the world, but if you're outpaced by your overhead, you would lose money, right? So it's always a challenge, because there's always things you could spend more money on, or advisors and consultants and upgrades and improvements and new, shiny things that you could spend money on. And so it's always a challenge to really be very methodical and intentional about where and how you commit your resources, right? And one of the resources that's most limited is going to be, of course, your capital. and your human resources and intellectual capital. So that's always sort of a challenge, um, but really no different than any other business or any other service business, at least. Trying to keep that business running and operational in a profitable way. It's not like we build, manufacture widgets or objects for resale, right? So we don't have major upfront expenses for capital improvements or machinery or equipment or warehouses. That's just a very different business model. And of course, the way resources are spent in a business like that is going to be materially different than what we do with a pure services business. And I'm not sure there's a significant difference between, say, a law practice and some other type of services business, whether it's one that you might think of like a physician or a CPA or an architect, or just any other type of consulting business, right? What we essentially have to sell to our customers is our knowledge and know-how, and hopefully, at least from what I do, the ability to help them complete transactions and expand their business or contract their business, whatever it is they're looking for, but to do it in an effective and efficient way.
So, what are the different things entrepreneurs need to do about legalities when starting a company?
Oh, well, when starting a company, I think there's a lot of different factors to consider. Um, I'd say one of the biggest things that I recommend to my clients who are thinking about launching an entrepreneurial journey or a new business is to spend the time to actually do the exercise of developing a business plan. And I can't stress enough to my clients how important that is to put pen to paper and don't just jump right in and start the business, but actually, before the business has launched, to spend some real meaningful time thinking about um, everything from how you're going to launch it to how you're going to grow it and scale it to how you're going to exit it. You may have very different paths as an entrepreneur if your goal is to sell in 3 to 5 years versus run the business until you retire versus run it for 20 years and leave it to your kids and let them take over so it becomes a multi-generational business. All of these things lend themselves to very different paths forward as you build the business. Um, and it's just so inefficient um, to just be reactive when you have an opportunity at the time you're starting a business to be a little more proactive and really think about these things before you're in the middle of it. Because once you start and you're in the middle of it, I just know that for my successful clients and friends who are entrepreneurs, there's just never enough time, right? There's never enough time in any day. And that's to deal with the immediate, most pressing things. They're putting out fires every day or spending their energy on developing new business or new clients. They rarely are thinking about real long game issues like, what's our strategy for the next 10 years, right? And so it's really important to do it up front and to keep in mind that a good business plan is never final. And I mean ever final, right? A good business plan you revisit every, quarter or maybe every 6 months, and you change it and you update it and you shift and change strategies based on what you've tried that works and what you've tried that doesn't work and where you want to be. Um, it's just really important to think of it as an evolving document, and it's a lot of work. There's no question that it takes a significant amount of time to do it properly, and it's really not just an exercise, it's actually really valuable. So that's one thing to think about. Another thing to think about on the legal side is, what is your structure going to be, right? So take in my industry, for example, someone who's providing professional services. You could simply conduct business as a sole proprietor with no entity at all. In California, you could form a corporation, which could be an S corporation or a C corporation or a close corporation. You could form an LLC. If you form an LLC, it could be taxed as a partnership or as a corporation. You could form a limited partnership. There's a lot of different options when it comes to how to structure a company. And it's important to really think about how this decision will affect the business going forward, right? Because in a simple sense, it'll affect everyday, ordinary decisions and management and how you operate the business. In a much longer horizon, think about that business plan. If your plan is to sell in 5 years and you can tolerate being a C corporation, which has some downsides as well as some positive attributes, you might be able to plan far enough ahead to take advantage of some very attractive tax planning, like qualified small business stock, which can get you significantly better tax treatment when you ultimately exit and sell that business, as long as you've set it up correctly, it's the right type of entity, it's in the right industry, because not all industries can do that. For example, my business would not be eligible to be treated as qualified small business stock, but many of my clients are in industries where they can. And if they haven't thought that far ahead, they wouldn't even be asking the right questions when they're trying to set up an entity, and they might find themselves in I won't say the wrong type of entity, but how about a less efficient or less optimal type of entity, right? So it's important to get good advice, and that could be an attorney. It in many cases is actually a CPA who can be very helpful in guiding people towards the right decisions and thinking about some of these options that might not seem so important today, but might be very relevant in the future. I mean, another good example is, do you form in a particular state, right? So Anishka, we're here in California. So many of my clients want to form entities here in California, which is usually a very common way of approaching this. But hey, if they are planning to go out to market and raise substantial capital from sophisticated investors, that's very different than running a business by themselves and bankrolling it themselves and growing it organically. And why is that relevant? Well, sophisticated investors might not like an LLC. They might not even like a California corporation. They might not like an S corporation, or they might not be eligible to invest in an S corporation, like if they're a partnership. And so, by asking these questions and figuring out what their strategies are, maybe, especially if they're looking for sophisticated investors, they want to start out as maybe a Delaware C corporation, right? But if they're just going to grow the business organically, maybe a California S corporation is going to be a far better call for them. These are the types of questions that, are worth investigating as you're thinking about how to launch a business. Hopefully some of your listeners get something valuable out of that. Not an answer, but things to investigate and look deeper into before they make any decisions. It's quite frequent that I have clients come to me and say, "Hey, I'm set. I formed a company," and they show me all of their documentation, which was sometimes prepared and filed by one of those online services, which has pros and cons. Like, yeah, they're probably going to save some money and not be as expensive as having a lawyer and a CPA advise them. But if it turns out that it wasn't done correctly, or if it turns out that it wasn't done optimized in a way for what they plan to do going forward, it can actually be quite a bit more expensive, right? So all things to look into. I'm, again, not trying to give any legal advice or suggest one thing over another, other than investigate, and keep asking questions until you know um, the answers to what you're looking for. And there's just so many different permutations of this, that it's really important to spend some time and not you jump blindly into one specific type of entity or another.
Okay. So you're also passionate about providing high quality legal services. So how do you ensure that your firm maintains the standard?
Well, I mean, for a law firm, just like most other professional advisory firms, um, it's really something that starts with training, right? So everyone that works for me works closely with me, and we train all of our associates and employees very carefully. We have regular training sessions. Some are formal, some are informal. For professionals like lawyers and doctors and CPAs, there's mandatory continuing education, um, and that's usually a fixed number of hours per year, and you listen to 20, 30, 40 hours of continuing education by other providers who talk about cutting edge developments in your particular industry. um, but but really it's training. And since we're talking about entrepreneurs, it's about finding those smart people to hire, right? A lot of a business's success might hinge on your decisions to hire. And so that doesn't always mean someone who's, understands everything about your industry. Sometimes it does call for that, but other times it just calls for somebody who's very smart and you can teach them the business, or very personable and you can teach them the sales, right? If that's something your industry focuses on. So I would never underestimate the importance of good and careful hiring and getting references and making sure that someone you hire is a really good fit for your culture, especially if it's a new entrepreneurial business. Um, you have the opportunity to think very critically about what you want that culture to be like, and then seek out people who align with the culture you're looking for. Because I'm sure I don't need to reiterate the point, but if you have a culture in mind and you hire people that are incongruous with that culture you have in your mind is never going to materialize, right? So employment decisions are really important, especially as you're growing, and you've got to be very efficient at that point of a business, right? Some businesses need to be very lean, some don't, but for most businesses, those first initial hires are really critical to make or break a business and help you focus on the business so you can really stay working in the business and working on the business and not being distracted with employment issues or bad fits because you made a rush decision on hiring or a poor decision on hiring.
So what else do you look for when hiring someone?
Well, I mean, I think the key things are what I already talked about. We obviously look for a baseline level of skills, but I don't typically look for the wisest or smartest candidate in the room. I look for somebody who's smart and trainable, and great personality, great fit for the culture in the firm. Those are all really important factors.
So can you share a book, podcast, or resource that has significantly influenced your career?
So I do a lot of negotiating, right? I'm buying and selling companies pretty much all the time. So there is one book called Never Split the Difference, written by a former FBI hostage negotiator turned true negotiator, and so that's a really interesting book and probably worth a read, because in some respect we all negotiate, right? Every single day, whether you're buying a new car or selling a multi-million-dollar company, or trying to get a class added to your schedule that they tell you there's not room for you, right? So um, that's a good one. I really like that one. Never split the difference.
As an entrepreneur, how have you evolved over time, and what are some valuable lessons that you've learned along the way?
Well, I think over time, it's been very valuable to learn that it's a very long game, a long road, and not to get too hung up on immediate things that happen and short-term results, um, as well as short-term problems. Things really do have a way of working themselves out. And so, um, just like life, I think as you mature in your business cycle or in your life itself, you start to realize what's important and slow down and not get so hung up on the smaller things and the smaller details and really stay focused on the big picture.
But initially, it's kind of easy to get hung up on those failures, even though they're not that important. But how do you get over that?
The mindset is number one. If there's a failure that happened, it's a sunk cost. What are you going to do? You can't go back in time, you can't change it. And if you're more spiritually inclined, there's a great book called Zen and the Art of Happiness. And one of the key themes of that book is getting to a mindset where whatever happens or happens to you is the best possible outcome of all possible outcomes, right? And that doesn't, in my mind, necessarily make it so, but it's more about getting to a mindset where it's the best outcome of all possible outcomes.
What's the most valuable piece of advice you've received in your entrepreneurial journey?
Oh, I would say it was from a physician who was listening to me complain about how stressful and hard it was and how hard I was working. And he looked me dead in the eye and said, I've been at this a long time. I've watched a lot of people mature through their grow through their businesses. And he goes, look, I can't think of a single person who regrets working super hard at the beginning of their path, because the learning curve is so steep and the payoff is often so great, um, that the people who have regrets are usually the ones who slacked off and didn't fully embrace the opportunity and jump in with both feet, right? So I heard him, I listened, I jumped in with both feet, I worked double hard, burned the midnight oil, and um, I think he was right. So everyone has to make that decision for themselves, of course.
What do you like most about entrepreneurship today? And is it still the same as what initially motivated you to start your company?
It's not the same. It's, I would say, somewhat glibly, it's kind of dopamine. And what I mean by that is, I'm not working for somebody. I'm not a W-2 employee. So every time I bring in new business or land a new client, like, you get these small hits of dopamine every time someone refers you a new client that you're super excited to work with, and they're in a very interesting industry. You're like, wow, I'm really excited about this. It's very different than being assigned a task in a larger organization where you're not an entrepreneur, right? And so, um, it makes every single day more exciting and rewarding because it's your business, right? It's your opportunity to lose or to get, right? And so I wake up every day excited to see what's going to get thrown at me today, and hopefully it's all good stuff.
So when you win, it feels like a personal victory now that you're an entrepreneur.
Sure, yeah, it does. But also keep in mind that the defeats are also just as personal, right? And so there's a lot of volatility, meaning a lot of ups and downs, and you just have to be prepared for that if you want to be an entrepreneur, and with a little bit of luck and a lot of hard work, hopefully there's a lot more of those ups than the downs.
I think that's a good place to end this. So, do you have any final words of wisdom that you would like to share with the audience?
I mean, only for me, I've really enjoyed the entrepreneurial journey. Um, it was a difficult jumping off point because I did have a great career in an established firm, and it was hard to leave all that behind and start something new and know that my family was relying on me. We if we didn't make money, how was I going to keep the lights on, right? But in reality, I could always go back to another firm. I could always start over, but it's just being bold, brave, perseverant, and stick with it. Yeah.
I've truly enjoyed and learned a lot from our conversation today. So thank you so much for sharing your time and insights.
Sure, sure. Nice to speak with you, Anishka.